Hello, everybody. Today's episode is called Nerd Immunity, Collective Wisdom and Conspiracy Theories.
And so this is a very hot topic. And at the beginning, we were questioning whether we wanted to speak about something that creates so much division and rifts among our communities. And then we decided that actually that is a good reason why to talk about this, because as we can see in this meme,
dividing good people against each other. So hot right now.
So yeah, we've been all experiencing and witnessing these kind of differences in opinions and which one is the right narratives. And we were even wondering, is this the way that we should talk about it? Is it about one narrative being more true than the other? And to try to answer this question and try to go deeper into this topic, so we realized that we need to reclaim the need to do our research. And so doing our research is something that can actually help us to develop what we've named nerd immunity. And nerd immunity is something that can shield us, create a protection against the kind of manipulation that can come both from the government and from these online disinformation campaigns that get spread. So
or your aunt and uncle, especially the crackpot ones that will just have very compelling narratives to tell you.
And so we believe also in the need to become Jedis at making distinctions that are going to help us to understand which narrative can have some truth behind it and which ones are the ones that are totally far out. And so we thought that the speakers that we invited today are two badass researchers that can help us understand what is nerd immunity and how to develop it and how it can protect us. And so we are going to welcome our first speaker.
So our first guest is Erik Davis, critic, rock music critic, writer, podcaster, journalist, and most recently, writer of High Weirdness, Drugs, Esoterica, and Visionary Experiences in the 70s. Kick-ass, mind-blowing read, changed my perception on a lot of things. Welcome, Erik.
It's great to be here. I love boom, so I'm part of it's like a virtual boom going on.
Yeah.
I can hear the thumping.
Thank you, Erik, for being with us. And the second speaker, it's not a coincidence. She has a similar name. She is a writer, an anthropologist. She has a postdoc from the London School of Economics, and she recently wrote Occult Features of Anarchism on the conspiracy of the kings and the conspiracy of the peoples. Please welcome Erika Lagalisse.
Hello, everyone. Hello. It's an honor to be here. Thank you. I would much prefer to be at the party, believe me, but it's still an honor to be here with you in my living room as well.
It's more intimate this way. We're in each other's spaces. So with no further ado, I'd like to fire a first question at Erik. What is it that we can learn from the 70s, the countercultural movements from then, and how have things changed today? Because we're living in a pretty crazy time.
Yeah, we're living in a pretty crazy time, and I think one of the elements of nerd immunity, at least for me, and I'm pretty sure I'm also speaking for Erika to some degree, is to develop a historical sensibility. That even though history is ultimately very vague, it's really hard to nail down exactly what things are. There are reasons to engage critically with where we've come from because you begin to see patterns, things resonate. It's actually kind of tricky, it's like, what year are we in? Oh, well, we're in 1918 with the Spanish flu influenza. Oh, wait, no, we're in 1968, at least in America, with the race riots and a sense of urgency around an election. There are these sort of moments that echo through time, And so studying history, I think, is a great way of getting a different framework around the present, because if you're just present focused, even though there's so much going on these days that nobody can keep up with it, it helps provide both a kind of ground, like we've been here before, sort of, and also like a different way of destabilizing our contemporary sense of what reality is. So for me, the 70s is a really key moment. And I mean the 70s as opposed to the 60s. A lot of people, when they think historically, they just think about the counterculture from the mid 1960s through sometime in the late 70s, rising and falling and, you know, fragmenting. But for me, there's a real difference there that's actually important about now, is that in a lot of ways, the 70s was a darker, more difficult time. Even though there was a lot going on in the 60s that was rough, there was violence, there were riots, et cetera, et cetera. There was a general feeling that a lot of people experienced who were there, especially younger people, that a major change was coming, that like the civil rights movement in the early 60s was just the beginning of what was going to be a massive liberational expression, whether it was going to come through politics and political organizing and activism, and revolutions in consciousness, new lifestyles, psychedelics, releasing all of the bound up ideas of self that had to do with an older, now bankrupt system, and embracing a new way of being. And there was a lot of not utopianism, but also just a sense of transformational possibilities. And by 1970, 1971, most of those energies had kind of crashed and broken and fragmented, and they went on, and they were still lots of really powerful political movements, identity politics, women's movement, gay liberation movement. So the politics didn't stop, but it stopped being the sense like the whole thing is going to change. And instead, it was a more kind of fragmentary time, and you see a lot of things start to happen. People start getting into religious groups and esoteric groups and so-called cults. There's a lot of gurus. People who once were political start to get drawn into personal practices. It's like, well, I can't change the world. I can change myself, or I can change my immediate environment. People start going more and more into communes, off into the land. In the meantime, the world itself was changing in ways that are pretty resonant with today. I mean, I think if there's any kind of pre-show for our current moment, it's in the 70s, where you have sort of the rise of modern terrorism with hijacking and radical factions inside the West. You have concerns about the environment. There's a tremendous sense of pollution and toxicity and the violence of the kind of industrial farming order. You have the rise of new technologies of surveillance, and with that comes a growing culture of conspiracy. If you know your 1970s films very well, you'll know that there's a lot of paranoid conspiratorial films. And while paranoia was sort of part of the 60s zone, it's always been there with drugs and political activism, because yes, it's true, the FBI has infiltrated your student movement and is trying to disrupt the decision-making process and sow dissension, and all those things were actually historically happening. So there were reasons to be paranoid. And I think that's the final thing that I'll say. We can talk more about in other questions. But one thing I'm actually writing about right now is I realized, going back and looking over at the 60s stuff, where again there's a lot of the sense of transformation, but a kind of apocalyptic threat, a rise of surveillance, a sense of urgency, alongside an explosion of an interest in psychedelia and mystical transformation, and somehow they're woven together or sometimes falling apart. Like, it's very similar in that sense. But one thing that's really interesting when I go back through 60s texts, reading Ram Dass, reading underground newspapers, reading political people, is that lots of people talk about paranoia. And they don't talk about it like it's some pathological condition that only a few crazy people have. Instead, there's kind of a general acceptance that people get paranoid sometimes, and it's just sort of like envy or jealousy. It's like paranoia is just something that's just part of what it means to be alive at a certain time. And we've lost that in a really interesting way. People don't really talk about it that way. They might accuse someone else of being paranoid, or you might say, well, I don't like to smoke weed because it makes me paranoid. But we don't really think of ourselves as being sort of, kind of paranoid a lot of the time, when we're suspicious, when we need to defend our territory, when we doubt the reality of the information we're getting, when we start to build stories about what's really happening. Those are all different features of something we can kind of all share. And the reason I bring that up now, and part of what I'm talking about, is that if we acknowledge that just to be alive today, just to be a human, is to kind of be paranoid sometimes, that's just part of what it is, then we got to own it the way we got to own our envy, our jealousy, our anger. Like, it becomes just part of the stuff that's kind of dubious about us, that's also real and that we got to deal with. And I think that sometimes we disavow that so we don't question our own reality constructs, because we're not willing to go, well, maybe I'm being a little paranoid here, or hey guys, I might be being paranoid here, but don't you think it's an odd coincidence that X and Y happen? And so in a weird way, I think there's something healthy about not embracing our paranoia exactly, but acknowledging that it's part of what it is to be in a world, build a world, and try to protect the self in relationship to this this very chaotic situation that we're in.
We actually have a meme for this that we're going to share with you right now. So first, for those who are just listening, first frame says, conspiracy theories thrive during times of uncertainty. Second frame says, you're not super woke. You're falling into a coping mechanism people use to feel in control during difficult times. Mental health angle. Funnily enough, I was thinking of going into a political analysis of the 70s, but you took us into mental health analysis, which is probably at the bedrock of a lot of this. And owning paranoia, or just even sitting with it as healthy skepticism. What is paranoia? It's compulsive questioning of any kind of scenario. The brain is assessing whether it's true or not. And if the brain is not satisfied, it keeps on questioning. So I think it would be a lot better if we would be able to sit with it and see where it's coming from and finding what fuels it, as opposed to label it as something bad. And I think that also really overly simplifies things to our detriment. And one thing that while you were speaking, I just thought of was 1969, Slaughterhouse-5 comes out. And that is where there was also time travel, but out of control. So you couldn't pick where you went to in the time frame. It was the characters just being thrown across these different times. And that's kind of what you described, being thrown into the civil rights movement. We have a little bit of that. Then we have a little bit of futurism. Then we have a little bit of invasion of the body snatchers. Then we have a little bit of something new. Then we have a little bit of something in the past. And that feels like we're in a time where there's a bit of more of a loss of control.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point about the meme about control is really key, because if paranoia is partly asking questions all the time, which we got to support too, it's also a certain way of crystallizing answers. And if you're talking about pathological paranoia, what you have is a story that has just taken over the world. And whatever you throw at it, whatever countervailing data you provide, doesn't matter. The story is just going to keep rolling forward in someone who's genuinely, clinically paranoid. But we all do a version of that. We have this sort of narrative of what we have, and that as it crystallizes, it becomes substantial, and it feels like, here's a rock of certainty. Here's something that I can rely on at a time of tremendous confusion and ambiguity. And some of that, we need to have some bedrock values, some bedrock orientation, some basic sense of trust in certain things. But unless you're aware of that process and how it can go south, and anybody who's familiar with cannabis and psychedelics knows how it can go south, how you can be genuinely convinced of something that later on you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Or might even get in the way of having a good time. And you're like, where did that come from? Well, it was just a bad day. No, it's something in you that is both a friend and a curse, this building of a narrative that we all do. So I think that's in a way part of what makes me interested about the 70s is it's a way to like go through this stuff. And the people that I write about in High Weirdness all had their seriously paranoid jags and then reflected on it, but not just in a negative way, not just pathologizing it, kind of recognizing that it's sort of part of making meaning, particularly in a confusing time.
Thank you, Erik. So for now, we go to Erika and we ask the first question to her. And I would like to know, as I mentioned before when I mentioned the title of your book, I would like to know what is this very interesting distinction that you make between a conspiracy of the kings and a conspiracy of the people? Can you make some examples and where did you take that distinction from? And this goes in the same direction that Erik was mentioning before, the need to go back in history and to trace patterns and to see what happened before to understand what's happening now.
You got to unmute.
Ah, yes. Okay. Yes. And I'll answer your question with a historical expose. Sure. We'll actually go to the original example. Okay. The phrase conspiracy of kings that I use in the book and in the title of the book is a direct quote. It's coming from a letter written to Karl Marx from some socialist comrades in the 19th century. They're discussing the Holy Alliance. Okay. After the French Revolution, the kings and queens of Europe, they were very unimpressed, of course. They didn't want other revolutions to happen. They got together, they had a congress called the Congress of Vienna. Among other things, at this congress in 1814, they formed the Holy Alliance. They decide they're going to cooperate internationally against revolutionary inroads in Europe. So for the first time, they're going to have a system of, internationally deporting militants, transnational surveillance, reporting on activities, stopping publication bans and the movement of certain pamphlets around and so forth. And so Karl Marx and his buddies, they realized that this was going to make their revolutionary project more difficult. And so they're saying the conspiracy of kings must be met with a conspiracy of the peoples, by which they mean a broad-based global social movement against capitalism and elite power. And in the book, I draw out the meaning of this tale, partly for the purpose of showing that, the Holy Alliance and the Illuminati were two different things, and we can get into that later maybe. But, what I want to point out first, and, maybe why it's good to bring this out at the beginning, right, is to just demystify the word conspiracy a little bit. It's a very charged word right now because it's associated with the phrase conspiracy theory, which, for some people is the hidden and absolute truth, and for others is complete falsehood. And there doesn't seem to feel much middle ground these days, which is partly why it's hard to talk about paranoia in the way that Erik is discussing. And it's interesting, because right now you're going to get slotted in one way or the other very quickly in this very polarized debate. But it's worth going back, to history, to the 19th century, to this moment, to notice that at some point it was possible to speak in a very straightforward way about politics being conspiracy. In some ways, all politics is conspiracy. If you're going to intervene in anything in the world, you might have to do it with other people. You probably won't accomplish it all by yourself, which means, you're cooperating with others. And if what you're doing involves discretion, as it might need to, well, you have a conspiracy. So whether you're involved in politics, from above or from below, in some ways, what you are doing is conspiracy. And it's the question is not whether or not there is a conspiracy. It's who is conspiring to do what. And that's an important question to answer. Yeah, and I could go on, but
So actually, yeah, I would like to stop you here. First of all, to summarize a bit about this point, that we can see that there is power from below and power from above. And both movements need this coming together, organizing, working together, and conspiring together. And actually the word conspire also come from breathing together. So really pointing to this closeness of collaboration. And in that sense, we can demystify the word itself. And so my question is, so there is these two movements, the power from below, the power from above. They often conspire against each other in order to overcome each other. And can it be that some of these above powers would create a conspiracy that looks like a conspiracy of the people, but that actually is within a conspiracy of the kings? And to exemplify this, I would actually share another meme. If you give me a second, because this is a very important point, I think. And so maybe with the meme, we understand it better. So you describe it.
All right, so we've got a menacing caricature of Bill Gates. The whole thing is titled The Plan Demick, spelt in a slightly alternative way as it's appeared online so far. And there's a scroll with all kinds of lists of things that are disturbing people. And it's also instructions on what we could be doing or should be doing. We've got information control and censorship. We've got shutdown and social distancing. We've got the blaming of President Trump, martial law and checkpoints, mandatory vaccine rollout. Mandatory vaccine rollout is also plan number 666, just to throw in a little bit of religious numerology conspiracy there. And it's a little synopsis of fear mongering we got today.
And also this point of as if blame President Trump was bad. And in the sense, this meme shows a perspective that, hey, we shouldn't be blaming President Trump. And besides who he is and what he's doing, I mean, he is an example of power from above. And so if this meme is designed to stop complaining and blaming with the power from above, we question, what is the intention behind this kind of design? And so, Erika, would you like to say something about it? Not about this specific case, but in general.
Yeah, no, sure. Absolutely. I mean, part of the point in my book is about the conspiracy theory conspiracy, in the sense that, here the idea is that it's healthy, it's good, it's clever to be to mistrust government, to have a healthy skepticism about things, to not just accept anything you're told on the news. We have very good reasons to mistrust elites. We have good reasons to wonder if the CIA is maybe involved in drug running in Latin America, or to not trust the Food and Drug Administration or pharmaceutical companies as our health. I mean, it's good that we know that government and politicians, when they get together in the economic summits that they have to make their trade agreements and all the things that they do that are not even that secret, really, that what they're doing is basically conspiring against ordinary people, trying to figure out how to extract as much profit from us as possible, with giving us as little as possible in return. It's good we know this, but precisely because we know this, and because we know from many historical examples that governments will use disinformation to achieve desired outcomes, we need to be even more critical than the critics and ask, is it not possible that authorities are themselves intervening in the realm of conspiracy theory? Are they not possibly trying to steer well-intentioned independent researchers in one way or the other? When I first discovered the sort of YouTube and all of the wonderful conspiracy theories on YouTube that I thoroughly enjoyed starting from about 2005, I noticed that the certain patterns in them, a lot of them were focusing on 9/11, right, as a big historical event that had just recently occurred. And but not all of them were, but a lot of them were, and they were developing, counter narratives to the main one, and the categories in play were oil men and politicians conspiring against, regular people, I'm summarizing, but more or less. Now, 10 years later, you look at the sort of well of conspiracy theories on YouTube and you notice something different. The narrative, the overarching narrative is not oil men and politicians conspiring against the people. It's a globalist conspiracy against America. It's a very different narrative, actually, where politicians have become, bankers, and Jews specifically. Like the people and the categories in play have shifted. Now, does this happen all by itself? Maybe, should I do what a lot of the educated lefty colleagues I have do, which is sort of just blame the stupidity of the working class for this or something? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that it is true that there are centuries of anti-Semitism and racism and stuff make it that, if people are presented, with these kinds of theories, they might be vulnerable or attracted to them. And people are also completely competent in coming up with the stuff on their own. But it's worth wondering whether or not there are not some people that are interested in egging things on in this direction and kind of seducing critical people with this particular kind of narrative. There are books written 15, 20 years ago, at the sort of dawn of the internet, talking about how it might be necessary to do this. So there are sort of very open conversations about how the internet can lead people astray. And so government might need to come inside and kind of surreptitiously, help keep things together. There's a name, Cass Sunstein, which I'll spell for you. It's CASS and then Sunstein, SUNSTEIN. This is a legal scholar who writes about how it might be important to sort of intervene in the information on the internet to keep, government strong. And, there's also a lot of ample historical examples of this happening in the past. Like there's the pamphlet, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is a pamphlet that was a forgery created at the beginning of the 20th century that blames the increasing consolidation of financial power in the world, which was happening at the time with the formation of modern banking and so forth. It blames it all on the Jews. So it's not the capitalists that are getting together to create banks and create profit from us. It's not that the capitalists are Christian and Jewish and Muslim and all the things that capitalists are. It's that there's one specific group of people and they're the only capitalists and they are the ones that are ruining everything for us. And this pamphlet, it makes a very compelling case for this, I suppose, for some people. And it's distributed like it's Henry Ford, the guy with the car company. So this guy himself, who ends up, making a killing off of the war, doesn't he? He literally, he distributes 500,000 copies of this pamphlet. He himself, goes through the efforts of distributing this pamphlet. Now, this does not mean that Henry Ford single-handedly orchestrated the Holocaust or something like this either. No way, forget it. But if we're going to talk about conspiratorial activities, it would be good to move our attention from, people like Jews to people like Henry Ford. And like, what is that going on there? How does that work? We don't want to be fooled by elites. Good, let's not be. Let's notice that like a lot of the form and content of the QAnon material is actually suspiciously similar to the protocols, both in terms of the content and the story that's being told, as well as how it's being given to you, through a back channel. And how convenient for elites that, as they truly are getting together in their global meetings, figuring out how to control us and extract value from us, that, we're not organizing effectively against them. We're busy, playing the Da Vinci Code or something. This is very convenient for people in power. And, and it can be really disconcerting, like to realize, like, not only is, do I have to take the news with a grain of salt, not only can I not necessarily trust everything that's given to me through mainstream channels, but that the stuff I get through the independent channels is also possibly tainted, is also possibly not trustworthy, either because of error, human error, or because people are specifically trying to manipulate you. Or even it can be very disconcerting to notice that there's no one place where you can go and actually get like the truth. Even intelligent people like me with my very clever book, like it can only ever be one. It'll never form a complete truth. The map is never the territory. Language will never capture reality. We always have to do that work, and it can be disconcerting, but it can also be really liberating, because you can get to a point where you realize, like, oh, the American political class, like, is a bunch of rapists, and QAnon is probably a bunch of bullshit. Like, both things are true. It's like this kind of enlightenment.
I want to lean in here because I think there's a few like how-tos that are embedded in what this wonderful presentation that Erica just made. One of them is that if you're going to be playing a conspiracy, if you're getting into it, then you're saying yes to research. In fact, that's one of the things that a lot of QAnon people say is, oh, what I've been doing research. Like you press back on someone, you're like, what? And they go, oh, you just believe the mainstream media. I've been doing research, because there's a whole almost game-like network of information sources online that will fulfill whatever particular story or element of the QAnon narrative you're researching. But if you're really going to play this game, the conspiracy game, the not mainstream media game, then there's one kind of research you should definitely do. And that is the history of conspiracy theories. And there are, of course, multiple versions of it. That just goes without saying. But when you start to do that kind of research and you're paying attention, you can't help but notice another thing that Erica talked about, which is that the same patterns keep coming up. So the anti-Semitism that becomes crystallized in a contemporary QAnonish account of global elites is very similar to elements of the Protocols of Elders of Zion, which is about 120 years old. But the more you go into it, you actually go, actually the stuff about Jews goes way back. Even in the Middle Ages, there was this idea of blood libel, that Jews would steal children for evil ceremonies that involved bloodletting and eating their blood or drinking their blood. And then you're like looking at contemporary Q stuff and you go, oh, adrenochrome. Wow, that's a wacky one. This idea that they're reaping the abused bodies of children in order to get this material that's going to, give them extra life in this kind of vampiric way. Well, it's just not that different, and like the political cartoon you saw before, Ivan pointed out that 666. It was very interesting because everything else in that they were portraying was completely secular, about politics, military power, fear, whatever. And then, you got to add that at the end, where we're going is some kind of vaccine regime with Satan involved. And that's another thing. You're reading through your Q material and you come across, wait, what are these guys doing? They're having what do they do? They're rituals. Oh, they're satanic rituals. Oh, okay. Well, then you got to stop and you ask yourself, do I believe in Satan? Do I think that Satan is real? Maybe not. Well, then what does this mean? Is it satanic? Am I saying that something is satanic when I don't actually believe Satan because I'm not a Christian? I don't really organize. Wait, but now I'm starting to think that maybe there is this principle of evil that's being manifested through this machinations. And like, wait, but as soon as I start to believe in a principle of evil, I'm talking religion. We're religion now. This isn't just about secular power.
Yeah.
And so then there you find yourself, you're in a narrative, and that narrative is very old. Battle of good and evil, end of the world, control, manipulation, buying and selling. That's a Revelations template that's in the Bible and goes back 2,000 years.
And Erik, if I can just point out, because what you're saying is written up in a really interesting way in a couple of articles. Or Chiara, I gave you the links to those. It might be worth sharing with the public. There's an author in Salon wrote a series of articles on QAnon, there's 5 of them, that kind of explain in good detail like what Erik is kind of elaborating on right now. It kind of picks through all the various mythological elements and narrative elements and references in the Q oeuvre, you know, and shows you like how they're related to different other historical stories and how this montage has been put together. And by the time you're done, it's it's interesting. It should be read if you're interested in QAnon, or if ever you've been interested in that material. Definitely worth reading those articles.
You know, and another thing that just before you guys get in is, anytime I talk about this stuff, usually I say it first, but I did a little spiel there, but I got to put it in there, which is that by talking about conspiracy theory critically, by putting it in historical context, we are not saying that some of these particular theories aren't true or haven't been true in the past. There have been stories that when they first appear have the smell of a kind of wacky conspiracy theory. Most people don't buy it. They blow it off. And then it turns out that, oh, wait, actually, yes, the CIA is dealing arms in Central America, and they are involved in just deals with Iran to release the, I mean, it's just, what, you know, and they're bringing crack up to Los Angeles. You know, it's
and that's
okay. So
the one thing that I would say critically about the meme that you showed earlier, where the guy was like, you're not woke, you're just participating in a coping mechanism, and we had the little mental health discussion. The one sort of critical element to push back on there, which Erik is getting at, is that it's not that the meme suggests that anyone who's interested in any conspiracy theory is actually being a dupe. And that's you know, it's tempting to respond that way to some people when they're saying things that you feel are completely absurd. And sometimes you want to turn to them and say, I think you might just be engaging in a little soothing activity. You might be bonkers. But actually, some of these things, as Erik points out, are true. And one of the sort of unfortunate functions of the conspiracy theory phrase right now is that it can be used to disqualify anyone from like the right to speak in rational, respectable public sphere by getting slotted as a conspiracy theorist. So, you know, anyone who talks about a conspiracy, whether or not it's actually reasonable, is now, it's now possible to associate that person, the person who's suspicious about the CIA's activities in Central America, can now be rhetorically associated with the person who thinks the world is run by Jewish lizard aliens. And that makes it more difficult to talk about things like the CIA doing stuff in Latin America, because now you sound like one of those crazy people. And that is, if you look into the history of conspiracy theory, like Erik is suggesting, you will see how this works and how this was actually cultivated in some ways on purpose around the JFK thing in the 60s, about how the phrase conspiracy theory was promoted to be used in the news to disqualify the people that were promoting the alternative theory about JFK. And whether or not, whatever we think about JFK, it doesn't matter right now. The point is that it's clear, you know, CIA documents have come up. It's clear that they're use this phrase to try and disqualify people and to cultivate the concept of a conspiracy theory, and not just a conspiracy theory, but a conspiracy theorist, and so that whole category of people can be maligned, and it's very clever. That itself was a very clever conspiracy in some ways, right?
To mention the proverb that's so popular in the UK, do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if there is some nugget of truth, we will do ourselves a great injustice to just dismiss it. And that will just continue replicating binary thinking. To offer a bit more of a tempered, balanced meme, this is us. After hours of watching conspiracy videos online. So, I mean, this is one of those you got to see, really, because there's a very cute dog wrapped in pink towels, desperately looking vacantly into space. And there's just the words, I don't know anymore. Because there is a bit of collective confusion going on. And this is where I would love to ask Erik, about the concept of the weird that is, you really spend quite a bit of time fleshing it out in different ways in High Weirdness. And how can it be? I'm going to let you give us a quick lowdown of what it is, but how can this concept help us today, particularly in the ecosystem of global pandemic madness, navigating that? How can the weird help us out?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this, brief. And I recognize it also kind of, depends on how weird is used, in English. And so it's going to have different plays in different languages. But I was interested in the problem of how do we talk about the mythopoetic and paranormal dimensions of psychedelic experience and other kinds of visionary experiences. How do we give space for that without invoking supernatural ideas of God, ideas of other dimensions, ideas that there are these spirits in nature, spirits in the cosmos, and all those attractive, but oftentimes at least somewhat questionable ideas. But I still want to make room for how extreme and overwhelming and bizarre and non-normal, non-ordinary experience can be. Synchronicities, paranormal experiences, seeming encounters with disincarnate intelligences. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's always been part of human experience in one way or the other, and continues to be so even in our secular rational age. And so I noticed that, at least in English, people speak English as their primary language, that people use weird all the time, but we don't really notice it. It's kind of a wastebasket word. We just put experiences and things that are kind of uncomfortable, maybe a little perverted, maybe bizarre, maybe things we just can't explain. It's like if I told you about an incredible synchronicity that happened to me last night, and then it's like, what does it mean, right? Well, I could say, well, this clearly shows that we're inside of a space-time matrix game that's being played by alien intelligences. And it's like, okay, that's an explanation for it. But maybe I don't know, I don't feel like an explanation today. Maybe I just want to go, yeah, it was weird. Meaning that it wasn't just nothing. Something was there, but I can't wrap my head around it. I am both acknowledging that it's real, part of my reality, part of reality even, which I think it is, but I'm not going to build some big story on top of it. So how does this help in a political situation? Well, because we find ourselves in an extremely weird environment right now, where all of our conventional models of what's going on are being challenged. We are almost like tripping on a bad drug, where we're feeding off of this crazy internet thing, which is just going insane. It's been going insane and making us mutants for, decades, arguably, but certainly in the last, 15 years, things have gotten really, really kooky tunes. At the same time as all of these institutions and patterns of weather. I mean, come on, it's all melting down, right? So I could get apocalyptic about it. It's the end of the world. And that's why we see the final battle of good and evil, which is one of the great tropes of conspiracy theory. You are captured by a conspiratorial narrative. The more you begin to think about actual historical circumstances as being a war between good and evil. That's just it. I mean, that's just religion. You might want to be religious. That's okay. But you start thinking about good and evil, you're probably already absorbed into these other possibilities, which are part of the weird. And I want to spin off something that Erik talked about the way that conspiracy theory as a category is used by mainstream media and other forces, partly to allow what we might think of as hard-nosed journalistic research people who are really digging down and finding out some very unpalatable truths about actual historical power and how it's being influenced, the CIA and whatever it is. And then at the same time, you have the lizard alien, the mythopoetics of the paranoid mythopoetics that take many different forms involving UFOs and other dimensions and time machines and satanic sacrifices and all this kind of stuff. So that's sort of interesting, isn't it? that you have one term or one space, not just a term, but like if you go looking for conspiracy theory videos, you're going to find a mixture of what is like hard-nosed, totally materialist, real-world historical claims and super far out mythopoetic claims. We are in a meshwork of these things. We have to navigate inside of this mesh. The idea that you can draw a clean line, like a lot of rational mainstream media people will go, oh, it's all just kooky stuff. Come on, just stick to the main narrative, kid. You don't need all that crazy stuff. And it's like, no. Actually, it kind of looks like reality itself seems to have these multiple dimensions, and I've got to navigate between them, and what's inside and what's outside, and what's a dream and what's a fact. And I'm afraid to say that that's the conundrum where we are. And the more you actually embrace this confusing situation, the less likely, paradoxically, you are to be captured by any particular narrative, particularly ones that are weaponized and directed precisely towards people like you. So it's a weird game where here's how it goes. It's like I'm realizing more and more that I do not trust the mainstream story, the story about reality I grew up with, the stuff I get in the newspapers, the stuff the politicians are saying. I can't do it anymore. Maybe because I had a bunch of psychedelic trips, I saw other worlds, maybe because I'm just skeptical, maybe because I'm paranoid, doesn't matter. But then you have this whole other ecology of people who are saying, yes, I agree, and this is why, and here's who's doing it, and it's very attractive. But if you're really embracing what I'm talking about, you're really embracing that we are confused. We are confused. It's not that confusion is a phase on the way towards some kind of newly regained certainty. No, that's not what you get. Sorry, welcome to Gnosis. It's a confusing game. And so what you got to do is develop an ability to think critically, even as you move through these different frameworks. And a lot of the problems happen when people try to collapse the frame. On some levels of reality, certainly within psychedelic experience, there are things like aliens or, alternate histories of the world, or that the serpent in the garden was an alien who gave them ayahuasca, and that's why things are the way, whatever. We get these stories, and they're powerful. They're often powerfully allegorical. That means that the story says one thing, but it's really talking about something else, maybe something that's happening inside of us, maybe something about the way the world works. But if we literalize it, we try to make it a certainty to explain the political confusion we are at this moment in history, that's where things get really rough. So part of what we're saying is not just to don't go down that road, embrace this other form of certainty, is that you have to kind of recognize that we're all trying to make it up as we go along together, and that we're communicating, questioning, thinking, reframing, drawing from intuition, drawing from rationality, from conventional history, from marginal stories, from freelance fringe journalists. And that's where we are. And so the desire inside to resolve that into a familiar story that constructs good and bad, that tells you what to think about masks or Bill Gates, the more certainty you gain out of these alternative stories, in a way, you're not swallowing the red pill. It's a blue pill hidden in the red pill. Looks like a red pill, but oh wait, I've just got a new narrative, and now I know. Now I'm going to defriend all those people. I've got my new pals. I've got a filter. This is a lie. Oh, that's a drop. That's a Q drop. That's the one I'm going to take. You've just taken a blue pill. And what this sort of research invitation is, or deep research, is to stay with the red pill, but it means embracing a certain degree of continual not knowing as we work together, as if we are on a leaky boat and we're all bailing water. Like, okay, that's bullshit. That's
it
bullshit.
can make you kind of insane. It can be a very difficult, uncomfortable place to occupy. I mean, as someone myself, I straddled these worlds for a while, right? That's how I ended up writing the book that I wrote. I was in a graduate program in anthropology. And at the same time, I'm involved in activism and with groups of people, some of whom are very interested in various conspiracy theories, and who said, "Oh, you should look into this and look into that." I'll tell the whole story is told in the book. I won't retell it all now about how it came to be. But for a while there, I was watching all of the YouTube videos, and taking it in, okay, and reading anthropology, and I'd go to work in the day, and then at night I'd put on YouTube, and a lot of it was seductive, a lot of it was interesting, and I had to kind of straddle these worlds and kind of had a little double life for a little while, and at some point I started being able to integrate them, and I thought, okay, I'm going to use my anthropology tools that I have, because I'll tell this story. Like when I studied anthropology, for example, you're being taught theories to understand society, and at some point, you're studying and they give you one theory. They tell you about structuralism, and then they tell you about functionalism, and then they tell you about all these other ones. Okay, and you're learning anthropology and you're getting all these theories, and then you hear one, and then they say, oh, and then we realize that one was wrong, and here's the one that comes after. So you learn it and then say, and we realize that one was wrong too, and here's the one after. And at some point I'm like, why don't you just give me the one that actually works? Why do I have to learn all of these wrong theories? Why don't you just give me the right one and we can get on our day? And then I realized towards the end of my bachelor's degree, like, oh, that was the point. The point is that there's never actually a totally right one. You're never going to get the right one. The point is realizing that all of these theories and ideas are sort of developed at certain moments in time by certain people who have certain baggage and certain political interests, and they're going to develop a theory, that reflects the moment and reflects their concerns, and then that will be replaced by another theory by people who are also imperfect and doing their best, but failing magnificently like the rest of us. And at some point, you have to get the sense that, like, oh, I'm never going to get the right answer. The point about being a good researcher is to understand where all of these ideas are coming from and triangulate between them on that basis. And because maybe I was taught to do that, in anthropology over and over again, at some point I was able to kind of integrate all of that and apply it to the various theories that I'm seeing on the internet, and then use the anthropology tools to kind of parse the rest of it. And in retrospect, it's like the result is obvious, but in no way did it feel obvious at various moments. It was very confusing. I myself was trying to talk to my friends about the research I was doing and being treated like maybe I was a 9/11 truther instead of a real smart person, and I had to sort of navigate that whole field. And by the time I was done navigating it, I thought, oh, I learned about what the epithet conspiracy theory can do, because I had sort of had to walk the line myself. Anyway.
Thank you, Erika, for that. I remember that part from the book. It's really like another reason why to read it. But before we move on, because also we are approaching 1 hour of debate, I would like to ask you about something very weird, as Erik would say, which is something that most of the people don't know. I didn't know it myself. What is the real story of the Illuminati? When we go dig in that, and I will ask you to make a short version of it because we don't have much more time, but because it's something that will come across as weird because we are so told another kind of story. And so I would like to give you the chance to phrase in a short way who were the Illuminati and why they came into existence. What was their purpose?
Yes, okay, let's get to the Illuminati. We all want to know about the Illuminati. I'll try to do a short version. It'll take a couple of minutes, but it'll be much shorter than the book. So the Illuminati, they're like, as I said before, right? The Holy Alliance forms after the French Revolution, the kings and queens of Europe, they're not happy, okay? That's one thing. The Illuminati, separate. The Illuminati is a group that starts before the French Revolution in 1776. a Bavarian professor gets together with some students. They start a little reading society. They have critical ideas about power in society. They're actually more radical than a lot of the other critical groups at the time, in the sense that they go beyond questioning established religion on the basis of growing interest in science, which was something, you know, going on at that time. And they go beyond talking about government corruption in a general way, and they start pointing fingers at other things like landlords. Why do they exist? Private property, the law of inheritance, like all these things that are keeping us poor and controlled. And they're asking these difficult questions. And it's a lot of people are interested. The society grows. Within about 3 years, you have about 50 people involved. And they're including, you know, some famous names we know, like Mozart and so forth. And they are asking, they're looking to create a more egalitarian society, and they're critical about power. Now, within about 10 years of them, their birth.
Sorry, can you repeat that sentence? Because you said it very fast, and that is actually the core. They were trying to create a more egalitarian society.
Yes, they were trying to create a more egalitarian society. They were trying to, they were against government in general, and they were interested in self-government. They were interested in deconstructing the social hierarchies of the day. So they're, in a way, they're the opposite thing to the Holy Alliance and what we normally think of them as. Now, within 10 years of their beginning, one of the members gets upset and tattles to his boss about this, you know, subversive organization. And his boss works for the Duchess of Bavaria, and it gets to government, and they get really worried. And in fact, they have a provincial concern that it's a whole plot to annex the electorate of Bavaria to Prussia. It doesn't matter. The point is the government is worried about this radical group, and they start like a whole propaganda campaign against them. And this is the first time that we hear the story that, you know, all Freemasonic lodges are under the control of the Illuminati. That we hear that back then, but back then it's the government talking, and they're worried about the Freemason lodges being radicalized by this radical group. So, you know, at this point, there's a lot of repression. The people that are involved, they escape, they go into exile or hiding. It's true that at the turn of the 19th century, other groups start that in some ways mimic the form and structure of the Illuminati and Freemasons. This is partly because some members, you know, leave and start up new groups. It's partly not that at all. It's partly that the, you know, government propaganda sort of creating a lot of aura of fear around this very scary revolutionary organization actually inspired people to try similar things independently. It's partly that, you know, and partly it's a cultural thing insofar as anyone who's going to be interested in developing a forward-thinking critical political organization at that time will probably adopt some of the symbols and language and motifs of Freemasonry, because that's a very dominant sort of mainstream public sphere where people are talking about politics at that time. And so if you're going to start a radical group and you want to make friends and get them involved in your thing, you might go to a Masonic lodge to try and like get new recruits, which the Illuminati and others people did do. And, you know, the, like part of the, and part of the reason they adopt the structure too is practical. So there's cultural questions, there's practical questions. So if you're going, this is a period of increased state repression and surveillance, as we just discussed, right? The kings and queens have gotten together and they've organized the whole thing against transnational revolution. And so now, you know, it's very clever to have a group where only some people, you don't know everyone else who's involved, because now if you get caught and tortured for information on your comrades, you can't actually give them all up. I mean, some of this is just practical stuff if you're a revolutionary. So, you know, that's part of the reason why these revolutionary fraternities kind of copy these forms. It's also true that the sort of ritualization of it, the identification of like...
Can I interrupt you a moment?
Yeah.
Because you didn't mention the actual name of the structure, which is the pyramidical structure, and which is usually the symbol that is associated to the Illuminati. And so you are saying that they needed the pyramidal structure so that the people that were above and below, they didn't know each other and they could protect each other. And so if they were questioned by the authorities, they didn't know who the others were. And this was the need for the pyramidal structure.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Yes, if that wasn't fully clear. Yes, the idea here is that, at least two things are happening. Partly, people are organizing in these pyramid structures for the practical reasons we just discussed. It's also true, though, that the feeling of being inside one of these organizations where there's an idea that there's special knowledge, that only some are ready for it, that we are advancing a project of social improvement and reform that's related to us having special knowledge that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, that's special magic, ancient knowledge that kind of gives the people involved a sense of power, and it conveys a sense of like historical rightness, and that the universe and history is blessing us in our project. It helps us to feel powerful as we go along. It helps others to respect us. This is kind of an anthropological theory of magic and power, so the initiatic aspect was also important, and that's and as I explained in the book, and this is the kind of thing that I can't explain all of right now, but the original modern revolutionaries, socialists, anarchists of modern revolutionism, they did embody a kind of Christian sensibility, influenced by, sort of modernized with scientific categories and influenced by the mystical traditions of elsewhere that began circulating in Europe throughout the Renaissance. So you have a kind of the idea that, we're going to build a heaven on earth, but we're going to do it with the work of men ourselves. So there's like motifs that are borrowed from like Christianity and the Judeo-Christian idea of history and universe, mixed with other things, such that it is a heaven on earth, but it's us that's going to build it. And one of the things that happens that kind of affects that shift, and I'm going to get back to the pyramids in a moment, is the Hermetic doctrine. And it's worth talking about this for just a minute, because the Hermetic doctrine is something that gets pulled up in the Renaissance and influences the unfolding of what we come to know as revolutionism and the left. And the Hermetic doctrine might sound sort of obscure. What is that? We may or may not have heard of it. But if I describe it, people will recognize this, because a lot of this comes up in New Age spiritualities and philosophies even today. What does the Hermetic doctrine say? Okay, this is a set of texts that at the time of the Renaissance, when they're discovered, they're understood to go as far back as ancient Egypt. They're understood to be the most ancient, pure, original, secret, magic, special spiritual knowledge. In fact, they weren't as old as everyone thought they were, but they thought they were really old. And they say things like, that time is characterized by a pulsation of emanation and return, that there's a original unity that gets like confused, it unfolds into complexity and difference throughout duration, but eventually there is a regeneration of cosmic unity at the end. That although there's difference, or the appearance of difference in duration, that there's a oneness that continues, that man is a microcosm of the universe, that by knowing the self, we can know the universe, and that secret correspondences unify the level of difference, and the differences throughout duration. And and importantly, that the cosmic regeneration that's going to occur is partly going to happen because we humans, people, come to realize this as the great, story of the universe, and that we are going to participate in the regeneration of cosmic unity by coming to consciousness of our role in this universal unfolding. And in the process of understanding this, like our creative power becomes understood as divine power. We are part of the divine unfolding of the universe, and we are, and so these ideas start mixing with pre-existing Christian cultural religiosity and other natural philosophies, and it comes to influence like Christian and general overarching religious culture at the time, such that before you had Christians in Christian culture, more or less, the idea was you weren't supposed to act on the world. You were supposed to be in awe of it. You're supposed to let it happen to you. You're supposed to be humble and experience the world. You were not supposed to have the arrogance to think you were supposed to act on the world and create the world. Whereas all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but gradually you have the idea that it is not just possible or allowed, but it's our duty to act on the world and to make it better. And that we have the power to do this, and that we can do this, and we don't need to sort of wait for heaven elsewhere. We can create it, and we can do it through works. And
funnily enough, just 2 hours ago, I was walking down the street and a massive graffiti sign said, "No gods, no masters." Which, synoptically gets the contemporary political movements of the streets of Athens today separating itself from both class and the top-down hierarchy in organized religion. But we are opening a lot of threads, and one component to all of this is, and I would be remiss if I didn't throw in a little bit of Terence McKenna, considering that we also have high weirdness as playing a major role in our compass today. We have lost touch with chaos. Chaos is what we have lost touch with. And I think this is an element of what is also this paradox, the ambiguity, the weird that Erik has been writing about. And I wonder, how could this be more applied in politics today? And I know this is not the easiest of.
How does chaos get implied in politics?
How could we be more comfortable with chaos, this thing that we've lost touch with, and how can paradox and ambiguity help us in our political movements?
Yeah, those are difficult questions. I'll just say a bit. I'm sure Erik has a lot to say. I mean, one thing you got to do is you got to stop, almost like with conspiracy theory, and you have to stop and say, whoa, what do you mean by chaos? Because that term is often used in a sense to mean just almost in the same way that anarchy gets besmirched, as chaos just meaning like destruction or the dismantling of all form, or some kind of very negative, and not just in the like bad sense, but negative as in just anti whatever else is going on. But within, certain traditions, certainly within Taoism, for example, that the originary principle of reality, like the source, or in a more hierarchical Western system, God, or the infinite, but in Taoism, it's like the Tao is considered a chaos, meaning that it is that field of potential out of which forms generate, and that in order to keep reality cooking, there needs to be some periodic return, either both on an individual level, which is what Taoist meditation is about to some degree, or on a collective level. It means some ability to allow for the deformation of your crystallized forms and a regeneration of new forms out of this sort of field. And so I think politically, this is going to take radically democratic forms, it's going to take anarchist forms, and it's going to take forms that I would say that are amplifying ecological thinking, meaning that you look at nature not as some kind of system, a new master whose laws we must follow, because that has its own kind of problematic history, but instead of recognizing that, we are embedded in nature. Part of these problems are chaos, is because we're so out of whack, and that to take cognizance of our situation and to create a politics, create a system, create technologies, create ways of living and being that are going to acknowledge our embeddedness in this reality, is that we have to kind of accept that broader view within which there's ambiguity, there's the not known, there's multiple actors that are playing the game at the same time. And personally, then your politics is partly just to get used to that. not to think that you can follow a simple program, to take responsibility for your participation in something that is also more complex than you can really, handle. Now, are most people going to play that game right now in history? Realistically, no. But I think that's part of the frame, that when we talk about bringing chaos back into the picture, it's being willing to trust the possibility for the emergence of a new world, or at least another way of being in this world, and that it involves both a collective embrace and a personal willingness to be unsettled.
Would you say that people who are more inclined to follow an outlandish theory are more initiated into also having the belief in the potential for transformation? Or
I
not?
don't know. It's there's such a wide range. We're already like generalizing a lot here, and it's hard not to, because there's a lot going on, and we can't stop at each time and go, well, this in this situation, this, and this situation, that. I do think that there is an initiatory quality to what we're talking about, both in terms of the politics that Erica was just outlaying, where there is an organic connection between these old Hermetic ideas and social movements, because there is an initiatory quality to being in a social movement, to glimpsing a better reality, or glimpsing a different way of being with people, and having to sort of actualize that, even if you don't know exactly what it means. But that's initiatory, as opposed to like, nope, things are the way they are, and we're just going to stick with it, and people are the way they are, and that more kind of conservative sense of what our possibility is. There is an initiatory quality. And I think there's also an initiatory quality to the mythopoetic dimensions of politics, which is what I was talking about before, that you can't entirely separate these real world, historical, material questions from the sort of mythopoetic domain that people find themselves in through their religious search, or their spiritual search, or their psychedelic experience, or their attempt to be in tune with nature. And that's part of the the tension that you're playing with. But it's hard to generalize.
Yeah, there is a tension there, because it might be generally the case that we could say an open mind in general towards various creative theories would also mean an open mind towards the possibility for great social change, and maybe in some ways that's true. But it's also true that we don't want to get misled into thinking. We can be tricked. We can think that social change is easier than it is too, right? We can think that, we don't want to think that just lighting a candle is going to do it. There are some forms of magic that have been sort of commodified or turned into kind of personal ritual things that are kind of trick us into thinking we can do a lot more than we really can with just little personal rituals. Sometimes, for magic to be most powerful, it's when we have large collective rituals, and when we're building collective action and community through the sort of magical practice, if you will. And sometimes, so yeah, there's a tension there.
I think I'm going to jump here and ask you, Erika, because you are mentioning personal practice and building movements. Do you need some time? Oh.
I'm okay, I'm good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, yeah, because you're mentioning all of this. So I think also this is going to be the last question to you. What is your advice to the young political activists, and what would you like to tell them as your final message to, what is that you would like to share with us tonight that could go towards them and help them in their newfound path?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a great question. It's a hard one to answer a simple way, because I did my whole PhD on social movements. So I have so many things to say. But the one thing I'll focus on now is the question of being open to religious and spiritual difference. Okay, and this is a story I tell at the beginning of the book, and I'll tell it briefly here, which is sort of how I came to write this book. Directing myself largely to lefties and anarchists who are very judgmental and closed to people that have diverse religious beliefs and interests, and how they see that as a kind of false consciousness, and how that limits the possibilities for coalition building on the left. And possibly with many of the people that would be here listening today as well. And so I tell a story at the beginning about how there's these anarchists in Montreal. We're organizing a speaking tour of activists from Mexico to come up and talk about the struggles in their region. And there's two of them, and they're both talking. The man is talking about union movements and the political prisoners and things that are easily recognizable as political questions. And the Indigenous woman of the pair who speaks, she's talking about her experience trying to help women resist sterilization campaigns among women in her region, these sort of like racist, sexist policies of like sterilizing women. And as she speaks, she talks about how it's important to honor the harmony among all creation. And she uses a religious and spiritual language as she's speaking. And the audiences that are full of like lefty activists of various kinds are responding much better to the man than to her speech. And she ends up getting kind of ignored. And it's a difficult story, and it angered me, and it was part of what inspired me to write this book. And when I was going earlier, I was talking about new age movements and politics, and the reason I was getting into that is because part of the purpose of the book is to show that the lefties who are who say things like no gods, no masters, who say that religion is the opiate of the people, who critique and a lot of hippies or people interested in new age stuff because they see it as a kind of not very hardcore political. They see it as flaky. They'll talk about it in terms of cultural appropriation, and there's a lot of critique that goes on in the left among people who are interested in diverse spiritual and religious traditions, whether they're Indigenous or not. And I wanted to kind of make a point that it's disingenuous, it's misguided. The left has always, in a way, involved its own cosmology and underlying spiritual and theological ideas. It's misguided, and it's impractical, and it's also just wrong to kind of assume that that we cannot possibly have any kind of coalition or cooperation with others who don't immediately share our categories and vocabulary, and that there needs to be a more openness to work with diverse people on that basis. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically anybody who's interested in like non-fragmentary lefty politics, make sure you get this segment and replay it a few times, and then see how this can broaden both the analysis of history, critical thinking, and not falling into traps of bullshit or nonsense, and finding a way to hold a diverse set of collective elders, yelders, and any kind of wisdom that comes from multiple perspectives. It's a good start. I would like to ask Erik, also to the Boom community that knows him, and he's also familiar with the festival, but then at large, the counterculture scene, the festival scene, the psychedelic community. If 2020, October, November, autumn of 2020 is a turning point, potentially. What can these scenes, the countercultural scenes of today, do? Maybe it's learning something from the 70s, maybe it's carving a new path, but would there be something that is a lead to where to dig more for this particular set of subcultures?
Yeah, I was talking to an older woman last night, very interesting, healer and teacher. And we were talking about a certain characteristic that we have found among certain people who've been using psychedelics for a while or coming out of countercultural scenes. And it's a way of being balanced between being grounded and ungrounded. And one of the ways, we all need some ground, right? You need some sense of like a framework or something you can trust or identify with, a framework to work within, a training process to embrace, and all of these things. And I think one of the things that's happening with these narratives now is that the way that they get supported online, the way that they're firmed up seemingly with feedback online, gives you a sense of ground. And this is like trying to find the ground in the world. Like, now I know who's actually behind the virus. And I have all these people and information sources that confirm my bias. And I feel a sense of ground through my certainty. But inside, what's really happening? I mean, the paradox is a lot of people who are put forward a kind of independent, anti-authoritarian, critical attitude towards the mainstream. When you actually talk to them, they sound like robots because you can anticipate every move they're going to make. It's like a little bot going off if you're doing it online. You're like, I could program this. Not to denigrate people for not arguing in a sophisticated way, but it's more to underscore the fact that part of what's happening here is that you're finding a ground, a framework outside of yourself, sustained by all of these processes. To my mind, the kind of coming together that is most effective at points of transition and chaos like now is it's a little different. The ground is sort of what your personal work is about. Like the function of spirituality, New Age, lighting the candle, doing the retreat, is not to discover some new reality. It's to build up your capacity to, in a sense, be your own ground. And from that perspective, to neither be as attracted into dominant certainty frameworks or narratives, but also be much more comfortable with dealing with people who are coming from a different perspective or offering something that you don't understand that might be interesting, rather than something like, oh no, I know those, oh no, they just want me to go down that rabbit hole of X and Y. And because I think part of what the underlying story here is like, how do we bring these things together? And they're not the same thing. The personal work, the mythopoetic work, the spiritual work, while it has an influence on how you show up in the world, it's not the same thing. So don't confuse it. Don't think you're saving the world by lighting your candle. But on the other side, don't think that lighting your candle can't help, because it can make you be more grounded within your own human. Here you are. You're as much a part of the cosmos as anybody else. Your perspective is as valuable as part of what's happening as the trees, the bankers, the aliens. You know, you're as much it. And to be able to really come from that place, it also gives you this enormous sense of freedom. And you don't need those structuring narratives as much. And you start to realize that, like, oh, part of what we're doing here is learning how to elegantly move between different kinds of narratives that are appropriate in different situations. You know, if I get stabbed accidentally, like, this is not the time for chakra energy work. No, I'm going to go to the doctor, right? Does that mean I'm going to go to the doctor because I'm feeling depressed or I'm having energy pattern? No, I might go to a New Age healer and, oh yeah, that actually kind of helped out. So we have to be able to move intelligently between these kinds of worlds. And one of the ways of doing that, when I say about working on yourself, I don't mean just like in isolation. You obviously should be developing real communities and face-to-face ones if you can, even though, of course, that's part of the problem these days, but at least intimate communities with people you really resonate with. But to be able to really, come from your own seat in a way. And that's hard work too, but it goes right in hand with this all of the demands of our moment, and the necessary challenges of working in collectives and of actually expressing your vision of a better world.
Whew. Man, the one thing that always nags at me is I really ascribe to trying to resist the dominant culture of certainty, but I don't know how to believing in this and knowing that feeling that this is a trap of oversimplification that lacks nuance and complexity and richness of the world. How to get somebody else to see that the step process is something that is a bit lost on me, and I don't know how to get there. Any ideas?
I mean, I don't know if this will answer the question, but I know that, sometimes it means meeting people where they are. And maybe that's what I was trying to say to the lefties earlier, that you have to meet people where they are. So let's say I have a friend, okay, and she's deep into the QAnon. She's really deep into it. Now, how do I have a conversation like Erik and I? What do we do? So in her case, without telling her whole life story, she's someone who had a very difficult life. She's a lot of trauma, sexual trauma, terrible things happened. And she was medicated, okay, and given pills. And these, made her life worse, actually. She's in a very dark place at one point. And she gets to watching YouTube. She discovers Jesus. And at some point, Jesus says, you know what? You don't need these pills. This pills is poison and it's making you worse. You need to stop taking them. She decides she has the confidence now. She's going to throw away these pills. These pills are, technically ones you're not supposed to just stop taking. There's those kinds of antidepressants that, So she throws them away. She actually does very well, even though supposedly she's not supposed to do that. She followed Jesus' advice. It goes very well. She feels amazing. Her physical health improves. Her emotional health improves. And obviously now she's very into Jesus. Jesus totally gave her the confidence to do this. It worked. It's confirmed for her. And now the people that told her to find Jesus, she listens to them. They're very important to her. And it's the same people are telling her to go, all the QAnon stuff. So when I speak with her, because I know her, I have a lot of empathy and respect for this person, and I'm not going to teach. I know her story, and when she says, Jesus doesn't want me to do my artwork anymore, I say, I think Jesus does want you to do your artwork. And I speak, I get into it and I speak in a Christian idiom with her. I don't start by saying, well, first of all, we have to understand that everything you say and think is wrong and you've been fooled by the internet and Jesus doesn't exist. I'm not going to get anywhere with her like that. And, so instead I try to meet her where she is. And I say, okay, well, let's take Jesus for granted. Let's do that. And let's just try and focus on parsing some of this QAnon stuff. And that's how I'm going to be able to dialogue with my friend. And I feel like each case it depends on the case, right? Because it all depends on who you're talking to, and a dialogue has to be developed between you and the other person. And so if you kind of go in preaching, so it doesn't necessarily always work.
So thank you very much. I think we need to wrap it here. And I'm really happy that actually we are finishing on these notes that were also the notes with which we started with. How do we mend the rift? How do we talk to people that don't have the same opinions than us? How do we enter in resonance with them so that we understand where they're coming from? They can understand where we are coming from. And so there is this communication again, this movement again, and there is no more this wall. Mm-hmm. And I think this wall between groups of people that think different things, which many of them have been raised in the past 8-9 months, these are the walls that we need to be very careful and to really understand why they are there, who wants us to be separated, who wants us to not to talk with the people that used to be our friends. And so I'm really happy that both of you talked to those points and how to mend the rift and create bridges.
Can I just add one thing just on that point, because it just is another way of saying the same thing that Erica said, which is that is to recognize the feelings and the values that are motivating the other story. Don't come in at the level of the story. That's stupid. Come on, you don't really believe that. Why would you think that? But you go, okay, no, though, there's something going on. There's a cluster of fear, and some people are really motivated by fear. Some people are motivated by love. They love the children, and they hate the fact that there's a organized pedophilia, which there is. I mean, there's definitely organized high-level pedophilia in the planet. Does it take the form that QAnon says it does? It seems unlikely to me, but that's motivated by a value that you can kind of appreciate, even if it's not your value. You can kind of appreciate it in the United States. Not to say that this works very well. You can see how polarized the country is, but I recognize that some of the really hardcore, even Trump supporters, are motivated by loyalty and patriotism. And I don't really go with patriotism too much, but I'm actually pretty pro loyalty, more than a lot of my kind of lefty friends. Like I really appreciate that value. And so sometimes I see aspects of what's going on where the position I reject, I can't abide in some sense, but I get where they're coming from. And so that already allows me a way of hearing something that's on a level beneath the story, where emotions and these kind of primary values, which doesn't mean they're perfect. It just means that they are coming from a place of value. They're not coming from some pure evil or some reactionary just idiocy. There is a value structure there, and not unlike yours, even if it takes a different form. And I think that helps also, especially when you're dealing with people you don't know. You can kind of sense where people are coming from. And sometimes you can't deal with it. Now you can't even get close to it because of where they're coming from. But hatred and resentment and, like that's much tougher. But when there's values there, you can get closer than you think. I'll say that.
And I think that in this train of thought, the values and the intentions behind us coming here together today is to show that we can communicate, that there is always a thing behind another thing. Doing your research is cool, but also contentious, depending on who's doing research and how they're doing it. It's important to look at history and look at the patterns and see what there is to be, what patterns and stories are to be told there. But don't rely on the story. Look below it. Look beneath the surface. Question things constantly, but take a break once in a while, and keep it weird.
Trust the weird.
Trust in the weird.
And light a candle.
And light a candle.
Yeah, thank you.
But like with a lot of other friends, though, because more powerful in a collective setting. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
Had a wonderful time. Thank you.
And just to say, because we never mentioned it, this episode is going to be recorded, so you will see it in a few days, possibly even after the American elections. We send best wishes to that moment in the near future. And
it's likely to get weirder and weirder.
Lots of candles required.
Lots of candles.
And so, yeah, I just want to say I'm sorry that we couldn't make room for questions from the public. We will see how to go around it. This was a matter of not being able to find the right date among us, but so
if the public gets lucky, maybe, just maybe, Erik and Erica will be around when this is screened, aired, and might even be able to engage in some communication. No promises.
Yes. And so thank you for listening to us, and yeah, I said it right, listening to us and following our journeys into the past and the future, and also well rooted in the present. And
take it easy, but take
it. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, Erica, and may this go to the best of all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.